translated The Little Prince. I think it's a great thing to do every day, Michael, to read out your foreword, because it really gives us a sense of the passion you have for the project and for us to really understand why you did it. So, thank you.
I wondered, as I was translating Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's glorious book, whether there is any book in the English language that is as familiar to so many of us, as universally beloved, as frequently studied, as deeply revered as The Little Prince is to the French. Unquestionably, we have many great and iconic books written in the English language that are widely read and loved and admired, but I can think of no single book of ours that appeals so widely across the generations, that remains so relevant, whose glow does not fade with the passing of time, that belongs as uniquely and particularly to the intellect and culture of its country of origin. My conclusion, as I was working on this, as I tried to write in his voice, live inside the landscape of his imagination, to tell it as he heard it and saw it and meant it, but in my way and in English, is that it might be impossible to understand France and the French properly unless you have read and known and loved this book. Certainly I have discovered in translating it that the best way to know a book intimately is to come to know the mind of the writer. I understand and appreciate more fully now the mastery of Saint-Exupéry's art and craft, the inspired brushstrokes of his storytelling. Translating this was a masterclass for me. Some will not be surprised to know, after reading my translation of The Little Prince, that this was my first attempt at any kind of translation, probably since trying to translate pages of Racine's Phèdre when I studied French at school. I was no scholar then when it came to the French language or literature, and I am no scholar now. I am, however, a maker of stories, a teller of tales. I have lived and breathed stories since I was a child. So to be asked to translate one of the greatest stories ever written was an honor I could not refuse. And if I am honest, I thought my knowledge of French would be just about up to it. Well, I was wrong about that. The economy of Saint-Exupéry's elegant yet complex prose, or is it poetry, proved to be a real challenge to my rather limited and literal understanding of French. I knew, of course, that I could crib off the established translations, but I also knew I must not, that I should not take even a peeky look at them, but rather translate as best I could, tell it down from Exupéry's French my way into my English, and then perhaps if I really needed to, have a peeky look later. So that's what I did. I also wanted to do this translation because I knew that so many English-speaking people have not yet had the joy of reading The Little Prince. It is a different book, unlike any other, strange, French. And in translation, the language can be inhibiting. Compared to the book's immense popularity amongst French readers, it seems to resonate much less with us. There might be many reasons for this. Broadly speaking, and especially in children's books, we seem to like stories that are above all exciting. As children, we love adventures that make us long to discover what happens next, with characters with whom we can identify strongly. The Little Prince has all that. It is much more the story of a relationship, a story that asks the great questions of life and death, of the human predicament. It is deeply intellectual and philosophical, and therefore deeply troubling. And it is not a book that can be conveniently pigeonholed. Is it a children's book? Well, I suppose that depends on the grown-up reading it. The Little Prince does not have a high opinion of the capacity of grown-ups to understand the world of the child. Sadly, far too many of them have put away childish things. Anyway, I thought a new translation might enable more readers, children and grown-up children, to discover this wonderful but different book. I hope it does. Great books can change us. Having immersed myself so completely in this story, I am sure I will never be able to look up at the stars again without thinking of the Little Prince up there somewhere. And I will look at a flower differently, at people differently, whether businessmen, lamplighters, or kings. I will think of myself differently too, and try even harder to look after and cherish the child in me, for the child in each of us is the heart and soul in each of us. And I will be quite sure to check my engine before I set off in my aeroplane on a flight over a desert.
Ben Okri is here. It's so good to see you, Ben. We also have Alice Mazzilli here, who's going to be doing some incredible calligraphy for us. Hi, Alice. And we're going to see her calligraphy develop throughout this next 55 minutes or so. Ben, interestingly enough, when Michael and I had a conversation about him reading the foreword out every day, you made notes on the foreword. Tell us about that.
Well, I made notes about the foreword. I made notes about rereading The Little Prince. So the first thing I want to say is what a special pleasure it is being here in conversation with Michael about The Little Prince, which is one of my favorite books, and it's a book I reread every year. And I also want to say quite clearly that it is a wonderful translation. I have read, well, there have not been that many translations, but I've read all of them many, many times. And it's a really, really wonderful, very powerful translation, very, very light, and yet at the same time, it freights the deep emotions at the end, those profound, ambiguous emotions. So I did make some notes, and I'll just share a few with you, just randomly. The book begins with an act of the imagination. There are puzzles. Those of us who live only with what the eyes see will sooner or later crash land in the desert. The boy does not come with all the answers. He asks questions. An exchange takes place. The boy learns from Earth something about his love back in the stars. And the aviator learns about love and his heart from this child from afar. This child has expanded the universe for him, expanded the world, but also expanded his life. The boy has come to show us a way to our truth, to our higher truth. It is an invisible way. It is a counterintuitive way. It is an upside down way. It is a way that tells us not to see with the eyes the important things, but to see with the heart. We have to train our hearts to see. We have to train ourselves to listen to our hearts. We have to teach ourselves to listen. And yet it is a story about two people who are lost, who are away from their true homes. Where is our true home? We're all a bit like the aviator. We're all a bit lost. We're all in the desert. And what we need is not to be rescued. What we need is a new vision to see our world in a new light. We need not just our eyes. If you try to open the box, the mystery will be destroyed. This is what science has done. It has opened the box and found nothing. Then it has proceeded to declare that there is nothing because nothing was found that could be seen. Seeing is not always believing. I'll end by just two more. We have to begin again our vision of life and civilization. We have to start with simplicity. All great literature does something that all the great teachers, all the great mystical traditions do. All great literature is a concealed fairy tale that enlightens us through the fluid nature of storytelling about the central mysteries of the human condition.
Amazing, Ben. Thank you. Remember that once we've read chapters, I say we, it's actually Michael and Ben that will be doing that, we're going to have a little conversation amongst ourselves, which you are, of course, a party of, and then you can ask your own questions to us. So whether you're watching us on Facebook, on YouTube, then feel free. And Ben and Michael will be more than happy to answer your questions. Make sure you get them to us. Right. Michael, is there anything you would like to say from what you've just heard Ben say?
No, except that I think Ben should have translated the book, really.
Oh, no.
That was the most marvelous introduction. It was terrific. Thank you, Ben. Really good.
No, Thank you. It's been a real honor reading this book of yours. Amazing.
We've got so much to talk about, but really the main reason we're here is to hear you both reading. So, Michael, shall we take off from where we left off yesterday?
Yeah.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. So now I had discovered something else very important about the Little Prince, that the planet he came from was scarcely bigger than a house. That in itself did not surprise me too much. I already knew that besides the great planets like Earth, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, which all had proper names, there were hundreds of others so small you could hardly see them through a telescope. I knew that when an astronomer discovers one of these, he gives it only a number rather than a name. So, for instance, he might call it Asteroid 325. I have good reason to believe that this planet from which the Little Prince had come was Asteroid B-612. This asteroid has only been seen once through a telescope by a Turkish astronomer in 1909. He made a great announcement about his discovery in a lecture in the International Congress of Astronomy, but no one believed him because of the clothes he was wearing. Grown-ups are like that. Luckily for the good reputation of Asteroid 612, a Turkish dictator made it a law which had to be observed on pain of death, that everyone had to dress in the European style. The astronomer repeated his lecture in 1920, dressed in a suit that was thought to be supremely elegant. And this time they believed everything he said. I have told you all this about Asteroid B-612. It's number 2 mostly because of grown-ups. And grown-ups are very fond of numbers. When you tell them about a new friend, they never ask you the kind of questions that should be asked, such as, what kind of a voice does he have? What are his favorite games? Does he collect butterflies? Instead, they ask, how old is he? How many brothers has he got? How much does he weigh? How much money does his father earn? They really do imagine this is the best way to discover what sort of a person he is. If you tell grown-ups, I once saw a beautiful house built of pink bricks with geraniums in the window box and with doves on the roof, they wouldn't be able to picture what this house was like at all. No, you have to tell them, I once saw a house that must have cost 100,000 francs. Then they would exclaim, what a lovely house that must be. It would be the same if you told them the proof of the existence of the Little Prince is that he was a beautiful person, that he laughed, and that he wanted a sheep. If anyone wants a sheep, that's proof enough that he exists. Tell them that, and they would shrug their shoulders and treat you like a child. But tell them that he comes from Asteroid B-612, and they will believe you at once, and they will not pest you with any more of their stupid questions. They are like that. You mustn't hold it against them. Children have to remember always to be very tolerant towards grown-ups. But those of us who understand life, we couldn't care less about silly old numbers. I should have liked to have begun this story, as all fairy stories begin. I should like to have said, once upon a time, there was a little prince who lived on a planet scarcely bigger than he was, and who was longing to have a friend. For those of us who understand how life really is, we know that would have been a far better way to begin, more believable. But I wouldn't want anyone to skip too lightly through my book. It has not been at all easy for me, and sadder than you know to write of these memories. It has already been 6 years since my friend went away with his sheep and left me. I tell you about him because I don't want to forget him. It is very sad to forget a friend. Not everyone has had a friend. And if I forget him, I could become like those grown-ups who are interested only in numbers. That is why I bought a paint box and pencils. It is really hard to try my hand at drawing again now at my age. Not since the age of 6 have I ever attempted. Until now, to draw anything except the insides and outsides of a boa constrictor. I will try my best to draw as well as I can to make the portraits as lifelike as possible. But I can never be sure things will work out quite as I intend. One drawing may look fine, the next one not. I do get size and proportion wrong too. In one picture, the little prince is too big, in the next too small. I know the color of his clothing might not look right either. I try a little more of this and a little less of that and just hope it comes out all right. I know I do make certain mistakes with details that are really important, and for that I'm truly sorry. My friend never explained things properly at all. Maybe he thought he did not need to, that I was more like him than I really am. The trouble was that I never could see sheep through boxes as he could. Perhaps I'm a little like a grown-up. Maybe I have grown old already.
Chapter 5. Every day I learned something new about his planet, about how he had left it, and the journey he had undertaken. All this information came in dribs and drabs by chance, as thoughts came to him. This was how, on the third day after we met, I heard about the terrible Baobab saga. This time again, it was all because of the sheep, in a way. The little prince seemed suddenly overwhelmed by some dreadful anxiety. Are you sure that sheep do eat little bushes? Yes, I told him, quite sure. Good, I'm happy then. I did not understand at all why it was so important to him that a sheep should eat little bushes. But then, still rather worried, he added, so they must also eat baobabs. I then had to tell the little prince that baobabs were not little bushes, that they were huge trees, as tall as a church tower, and that even if he took with him an entire herd of elephants, they would not manage between them to eat up a single baobab. The idea of a troop of elephants clearly amused the little prince. You'd have to stand them on top of one another, he laughed. And then, more thoughtfully, he said, baobabs, you know, before they grow big, always begin by being small. Of course. But I don't quite understand why you should want your sheep to eat baobabs when they are small. Really? You don't know? He said, as if it was obvious. I tried very hard to work it out for myself, and it was not at all easy. Anyway, it seems that on the little prince's planet, as on all planets, there were good plants and bad plants. And so, of course, there were good seeds from the good plants and bad seeds from the bad plants. But seeds are invisible. They lie dormant, hidden, deep in the dark of the until one of them has the notion it would be a good idea to wake up. This little seed will first have a stretch, then grow slowly, ever so slowly, up towards the sunlight, until at last, there it is, a sweet little innocuous twig of a plant. If it is the first shoot on a radish, perhaps, or the early sprig of a rose, then it can be left to grow on as it wishes. But if this is a bad plant, you should pull it up at once, the moment you recognize it for what it is. Now, there were some terrible seeds hiding away in the earth on the planet of the little prince. And these were the seeds of the baobab tree. All over the planet, the soil was infested with them. And with a baobab, if you don't deal with it at once, if you leave it too late, you will never be able to get rid of it. It will take over the entire planet, perforate it with roots. And if the planet is too small, which it is, and if there are too many baobabs, they will overwhelm and destroy the planet. And that would be that. It's just a question of self-discipline, the little prince explained later. First thing in the morning, you look after yourself, you brush your teeth and wash your face, don't you? Well, the second thing you must do is to look after the planet. You pull up all the little baobabs just as soon as you can tell the difference between them and the little rose bushes, which can look a lot like them when they're very young. It's easy enough work, even if it is rather boring. And then one day he said to me, I think you ought to make a beautiful drawing for children where you come from, so they can understand all about this. If ever they were to go off on their own travels, it might prove very useful to them. There's sometimes no harm in putting off till tomorrow what should be done today. But when it comes to baobabs, any delay at all is always disastrous. I once knew of a planet where lived the laziest man you can ever imagine. He just couldn't be bothered to dig up the little baobab bushes. It did not end well with him, nor for his planet. So just as the little prince had asked, I made a drawing of that planet. I don't like to be didactic or moralistic, but I could see the dangers posed by baobabs are hardly known. And anyway, the risks taken by anyone venturing into an asteroid are so dangerous that I decided just for once that I should set aside my usual inclination and tell it loud and clear. Children, look out for baobabs. I worked so hard on this drawing in order to warn my friends of the grave danger they had been facing for so long. And like myself, without even knowing it, I had to tell them, to warn them. You might well be wondering why there aren't many more big drawings of baobab trees like this in the book. Well, the answer is simple enough. I did try, but I just couldn't do another one. I think I could only draw a baobab tree when I needed to, when it really mattered. Baobab trees are a serious matter.
Chapter 6. Dear little prince, it took me a while to begin to understand just how sad your little life must have been. For so long, all you had for enjoyment was the beauty of sunsets. I only learned about this on the morning of the 4th day when you said to me, I love sunsets. Come on, let's go and see one, right now. But we can't. We have to wait. Wait for what? Until the sun goes down. We have to wait until it is time. He looked very surprised at that. And then you began laughing at yourself. Oh, silly me, you said. I was thinking I was still back home. Of course, as we all know, when it is midday in America, the sun is going down in France. So you'd have to be able to get to France in 1 minute flat in order to witness the same sunset. France is a very long way away, so it's just not possible. But on your tiny planet, my dear little prince, I suppose all you would have to do is to move your chair just a little, and you could see dawn and dusk anytime you want to. One day, you told me, I watched the sun set 43 times, and then later you went on, when I'm feeling really sad, I love to see a sunset. So, I asked him, on that day when you saw 43 sunsets, were you still sad? But the little prince said nothing. Chapter 7. On the 5th day, and again this was thanks to the sheep, the little prince let slip more about himself. He came out suddenly with it and with no warning, as if he had been churning it all over in his mind for a long time. A sheep? Does it also eat flowers as well as little bushes? A sheep, I told him, eats just about everything it comes across. Even flowers that have thorns? Certainly, even flowers with thorns. And when it comes to thorns, he went on, what are they for? I didn't know. At that particular moment, I was very busy trying to unscrew a nut in my engine that just would not budge. I was very worried by now because the breakdown was beginning to look more and more serious. And worse still, my drinking water was running out. Thorns? He said. What are they for, exactly? Once he had asked a question, the little prince would never give up until he had an answer. I was still struggling with my wretched nut, which seemed to be stuck fast, so I told him the first thing that came into my head. Thorns are no use for anything much. If you ask me, flowers only have thorns out of spite. Oh, surely not, he said. And then after a moment or two of hurt silence, went on. I can't believe that. Flowers are weak and simple. Surely they are only protecting themselves as best they can. They just hope their thorns look terrifying so that... I said nothing. I wasn't listening. All I could think of at that moment was that if the nut refused to budge, I was going to get my hammer and give it a good whack. But once again, the little prince interrupted my thoughts and would not let me get on. So you really do believe, do you, that flowers... I'd had enough. No, no, I shouted. I don't really believe anything. I just said the first thing that came into my head, that's all. I'm busy, can't you see? I have more important things to get on with. He was staring at me in utter amazement. What do you mean, more important things? What must I have looked like? Bent over this horrible old engine, hammer in hand, fingers covered with engine grease. You sound just like a grown-up. His words made me feel ashamed, and he hadn't finished with me yet. You confuse everything, he went on, his golden hair blowing in the wind. You deliberately mix everything up. He was really angry now. I once went to a planet where there lived a stiff-necked, red-faced old fool of a gentleman who never smelt a flower in his life. He never once looked up at a star. He never loved anyone. All he ever did in his entire life was add up numbers all day long. Like you did just now, he just kept on repeating over and over again, I have more important things to be getting on with. I have more important things to be getting on with. And because of this, he became puffed up with pride. In the end, he wasn't a man at all. He was a mushroom. What? A mushroom? The little prince was so enraged by now that he had gone quite pale. For millions of years, he went on, flowers have been growing thorns. And for millions of years, despite this, sheep have gone on eating flowers. Don't you think it worthwhile to try to understand why they should go to all that trouble to grow thorns if they don't serve a useful purpose? You don't think it's important, this age-old struggle for existence between sheep and flowers? Is it not a significant matter, more important than simply adding up numbers like the stiff-necked, red-faced old fool of a gentleman I met on that planet? Say I knew of a flower, unique in the whole world, that grew nowhere except on my planet, and that a little sheep might come along one morning and destroy it in one bite, like that, without realizing that he was doing it. Do you not think that is important? He went on, his face aglow now with passion. If someone loves a flower, unique in all the millions and millions of stars, and it makes him happy to look up there and remember his flower, isn't that enough in itself? He'll be thinking, my flower is up there somewhere. But if a sheep comes along and she eats that flower, for him, it would be as if all the starlight was put out. And you say that's not important? He could not say any more. His words were drowned in tears. Night had fallen by this time. I dropped my tools. My hammer didn't matter anymore, nor my nuts, nor even the prospect of dying of thirst. On this one star, this one planet, here, now, on my own planet Earth, the little prince needed comforting. Nothing else mattered. I put my arms around him and held him, rocking him gently. Dear little prince, I began, the flower you love so much, is no longer in danger. I will draw a muzzle for your sheep. I will draw railings to protect your flower. I will... Everything I tried to say sounded so maladroit, so clumsy. I did not know whether to try to stop him crying or to join in and cry with him. How strange it is, this valley of tears.
Chapter 8. I came to know quite quickly more about this little flower. There had always been these flowers on the Little Prince's planet, very simple, small flowers, crowned with just one ring of petals. They took up very little room and did not get in anyone's way. They would appear one morning in amongst the grass, and by nightfall would have faded away. But then one day, from a seed blown in from who knows where, a new seedling had sprung up. The little prince had examined it closely and soon realized that it did not look like anything he had seen growing on his planet before. It could be, he thought, a new kind of baobab altogether. This little seedling suddenly stopped growing and began to become a flower. The little prince was there to witness the appearance of a huge bud, and he knew already that this bud would grow something quite miraculous. This flower was not simply going to emerge from the shelter of its green bud and be beautiful. She would hide away inside, choose her colors with the greatest care, clothe herself in her finery slowly, arranging her petals one by one. She did not wish to come out all crumpled like a poppy. She wanted to show herself to the world in the full glory of her beauty. Oh yes, she was quite a coquettish little flower. She took days and days to get herself ready. And then one morning, there she was, in full and splendid flower, at the very moment the sun rose. And this flower, who had worked so hard to make sure everything about her appearance was just perfect, could only yawn and say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I only just woke up. Look at me, I'm such a mess. My petals are all bedraggled." The little prince could not contain his admiration for her. "You are so beautiful," he breathed. "Aren't I just?" the little flower replied sweetly. "And what's more, I was born at the very same moment as the sun." Although modest, she most definitely was not. Nonetheless, this little flower touched his heart deeply. "I think," the flower went on, "that it's just about time for my breakfast. Be so kind as to tend to my needs." And the little prince, rather taken aback at this, but wanting to do what he could to look after the little flower, went off at once to look for a watering can and some fresh water. But it was not long before this rather haughty and demanding attitude became too much for the little prince to put up with. For example, one day she was talking to the little prince about her 4 thorns, and she said, "Let tigers come. I'm not afraid of them or their claws." "There aren't any tigers on my planet," the little prince protested. "And besides, tigers don't eat plants." "I'm not a plant," replied the flower. "Well, excuse me," the little prince said. "And anyway, I'm not at all frightened of tigers, but I am terrified of drafts. I need something to protect me from the wind, a cloche maybe." The little prince was thinking, terrified of drafts? That's bad luck if you're a plant. This is certainly a very complex sort of a flower. "In the nighttime," the little flower went on, "you had better make sure I am protected under a cloche. It's so cold here on this planet of yours, not at all like mine. Now, where I come from, but there she had to stop herself. After all, she had come as a seed. There was no way she could ever have known other planets. Clearly embarrassed to have allowed herself to be caught out trying to make up such a silly story, she coughed 2 or 3 times to make the little prince feel guilty. "So what's keeping you?" she said, coughing again. "Where's this cloche then?" Of course, she was forcing herself to cough to make the little prince feel even more ashamed that he hadn't yet gone to fetch the cloche she had asked for. So the little prince, despite his great affection for this little flower, was beginning to have his doubts about her. He had taken to heart all the ridiculous nonsense she was talking, and it made him feel unhappy. "I shouldn't have paid any attention to her," he told me one day. "You should never listen to flowers. They are for looking at, for their scent. My flower, my own flower, filled my whole planet with her fragrance. But none of this gave me any pleasure. This whole story of tigers and claws, which really had irritated me, should have filled my heart with tenderness and sympathy. I decided that before this, I had understood nothing about this little flower," the little prince continued, that I should judge her not by her words, but by what she did. She filled me with her fragrance. She had brought joy to my life. I should never leave her. I should have recognized what a sensitive, sweet soul there was under all that rather inept and silly games. Flowers are so contrary, but I was too young to know how to love her.
Ben and Michael, thank you so much. Beautifully read by both of you. Ben, how do you feel having read those chapters out loud? It's a very different experience to internally.
Yes, it's reading when you read something like that out loud, it's you're immersed in it. There's something about reading silently to yourself, which of course is very beautiful and very, very powerful, and kind of awakens the imagination. But reading out aloud does 2 things: it awakens the imagination, but also awakens the power of the voice. And the voice gives a different kind of a magic and a different kind of a strength to the words.
Michael, do those chapters, when you read them out, do they have an emotional impact on you? How many times you've read it, you translated it, you know this text inside out? But I could even hear in your voice beautifully.
I do know it fairly. I tell you what I do feel is when I also, to add to what's just been said about the reading aloud, I mean, I'm one of these people who I prefer always to read poetry out loud, to hear the music and the words. And when there's a beautiful story like this, which to me is as close to being poetry as prose, I find more in the story for me when I'm reading it out loud. I hope other people do as well. But after this particular reading, there was a moment in it when I suddenly thought, my goodness, this is extraordinary. This was written in 1943, or published in 1943, the year of my birth. So it's a long time ago. And there's a line in it about how we must look after the planet. And this was in the middle of the war, for goodness sakes. And here's this extraordinary statement about how we must look after this planet. And it just came to me that, we have our little prince at the moment. We have children, Greta Thunberg amongst them. These children who look hard at the world and take in what it is that's gone wrong. And they don't want any more of our hypocrisy. And it really opens your heart and your mind, and it's troubling, because I've lived these years and I've lived as selfishly as anyone else. And children are really good at this, looking at you and asking the questions. And as Ben said earlier on, this little prince, he asks questions, and they're not easy. They really are. They just seem easy.
Ben, you said that you read The Little Prince almost every year. What is the sensation? What is the mood that carries you back to this book every year?
Well, I think it was Novalis who said somewhere that every beloved is a paradise, and I think that's true of our favorite books. A book that you love, a book that has become part of the architecture of your mind, is like a little paradise in a way. So you go back to it for its ever-changing mood. It's not the same mood. It's never the same book. Every time you come back to it, something becomes foregrounded. Something leaps out that was unclear to you before. I think it's the way literature works. I think it's the way poetry and beautiful writing works. It works in direct relation to what is truthful in your life at that moment, but also what is actually most important to you, but hidden inside you, hidden behind you. It brings out all of these hidden but essential things. And I think right now, Michael is right that our sense of the planet, our sense of the fragility and the beauty of the planet, and the fact that each day for the last 100, 200 years, we have been allowing different kinds of baobabs to sort of take over our planet, our environment, and our lives in the form of wars and in the form of climate disasters that we've allowed to sort of grow underneath our very noses, in the form of our racial tensions, in the form of all sorts of bad habits, bad ways of thinking and living that we've developed amongst one another. It's a book that speaks profoundly to the human. It's a very strange book, and also very, very lucid and tranquil, and it's full of lights. It's very gentle, but it cuts very deep. It's very strange.
Michael, Ben mentioned wars there, crises, and of course this was, I think, as you rightly point out, it was published in 43, written in 42, right in the middle of the Second World War. What influence does crises such as the one we're living through now have, do you think, on storytelling and storytellers?
Well, I can only speak personally, but I mean, I've been locked down because I'm the wrong side of 75, and I was supposed to crawl into my little sort of hibernation hole about 4 months ago. And I've never written better. I've never focused more. I've never lived more intensely. All my friends and relations have become more important to me. I've had time to think, time to stand and stare, as the poet says, and it's been deeply enriching. I know what's going on out there. No, I don't know. I imagine what's going on out there in some people's lives, and it's been truly dreadful. But I've been isolated from it. That's the whole point of this strange existence. We are isolated, not just from the germs, but from the consequences of the germs. But the result of it all is that I've lived this life partly for its own protection. I wanted to have a life where I had a routine every single day, and it was going to be writing for the first part of the day. And I was as regular as clockwork, which I'm not usually. I'm not a disciplined writer at all, but I have been these last 2 months, and I've loved it, and I've lost myself in it. So it's been strangely enriching. And of course we do know that in the First World War, every war, great writing has come out of it. It's not to say we don't need wars to produce great writing, but I do think we need intensity of existence. I think above everything else, that's what this story is about. To me, it's really about this child saying, look, feel, open your eyes, open your heart, it's there. That's what we are being, as you're not told, he's not nasty like, he doesn't tell, he suggests it. And in the end, you really want to join him, the way he is seeing the world, and you want to go and ask him questions. And since the whole point, I mean, I've been a teacher and educator most of my life, and one thing I do know is the most important thing we can give to children, yes, it's knowledge and understanding, but it's also that desire to go on asking questions, never to be satisfied with glib responses that the adult world generally gives you.
Ben, how have you found it? It's really fascinating that Michael's saying that it's the most fertile creatively period in many years. What about you?
Yeah, I think Michael is right. I think there's the combination of the forced solitude, with, I think, probably the most important element, which is a kind of backlighting of death. I think the combination of those two things, the death and the solitude, have a way of triggering, of opening up, tearing open the carapaces that we build around our heart. And it is the carapaces we build around our hearts that actually prevents our true creativity, that we build around our minds, build around our spirits. It's these carapaces, these layers of nonsense, of ideologies, of worldviews, all of this stuff ripped apart. Then our heart, our true feeling for life emerges, and with that, creativity. So when Michael says that there's a strong relationship between crises and creativity, but I think that's one of the reasons why we are removed from ordinary life, where we're forced into a new place. We're lifted into this new sphere where, all the petty problems, all of that petty stuff just goes quiet, because the essential things have risen and stand stark before us. And The Little Prince is exactly about that. It seems to me to be not a coincidence that it is after this man has a crash. I think of his crash as being in some ways like a midlife crisis. He has a crash. This is a man who's flying. I'm talking about the story here. I'm not talking about real life, just the story. This is a man who's flying, and then he has a crash. And he has a crash where? In the desert. These are two great metaphors in literature, the fall and the desert. To have a crash in the desert is to experience the existential condition of life. It is so. Out of this comes this prince, comes this little child. I think that's why it's such a complex and wonderful story at the same time. It's a story of a child. It's a story for a child, but it's also a story about us. It's about adults. It's about what we've done to ourselves. So it's two stories from two different points of views, in a way, fused together. The childhood that we need to continue to live life truly and fully and openly, and the adulthood that we need in order to create a responsible civilization. It's an extraordinary fusion of two aspects of what it means to be human.
We have so served as an inspiration for any of your books?
Not directly, because it's an inimitable work. You can only be inspired by The Little Prince into living better, into living simpler, living more wisely, into asking questions, into being as true to yourself as possible. As to being inspired from it into writing, I think it's too inimitable, it's too unique a work. But I think one of the things that it does do for me as a writer is it's a touchstone of simplicity of heart. We get caught up in our complexities, we get caught up in our intelligence, we get caught up in our reading and all of that stuff. And The Little Prince is like a magic. It's like a magic fountain. That's what it's like. It's like that magic water that you drink, and a kind of clarity. It brings you back to clarity, and that for me is supreme. To be inspired into life is a lot more important than being inspired into literature.
Michael, this question: in your opinion, why did Saint-Exupéry write a children's tale in the darkest period of the Second World War?
Well, that I do understand. Because by and large, when you're writing and you have children in mind, doesn't mean, of course, you patronize at all, but it means you certainly have in mind when you're writing and you're generally speaking, your main character is going to be a child. I think it's very important to keep hope at the end of the story. Whatever the child has to live through, whatever the suffering that he sees or she sees, at the end of the story, there has to be some hope, which is not necessarily always the same with adult literature. And I think maybe it is that if you're writing about children, I mean, for me, children are our hope. That's sort of what we're here for, in a way, to try and do our best to make this world a better place for the next generation coming along. And then that's the idea. I know it doesn't always work out. My generation and the one before made plenty of really hideous errors. But nonetheless, that is what we're here for. And we cannot do that without hope, without faith that this thing is going to get better. And books like this, I'm quite sure, do that. Because read these books young, and children can lose themselves in them, ask these questions, these big questions, become accustomed to the difficulty that there is going to be around them in life without being terrified of it. Know there is difficulty. Know there are unanswerable questions. This is part of growing up and seeing the world from an angle which is, yes, we can put this right. We have to watch out for baobabs. We do dig them up. We don't let them grow, because look what happens to society when we let that happen. What happens to our world? We learn these lessons in this book, but without him thrusting them at us. It's a suggestive, very gentle story. I think that was the word that Ben used earlier on. It's a very gentle story, an eminently tender story as well. I love this, the idea of it. To me, I don't say I've used this story, but I'm sure it's been there in the ether when I've been writing stories, because I write a lot of stories about islands and about two people who don't know each other meeting on an island, two people from two completely different worlds. And I have no doubt at all that this was there somewhere in the back of my mind. I read a book called Kensuke's Kingdom some time ago, which is about an island where two people meet from totally different worlds. I wish it was as great a book as this, but what it does do is to give an opportunity for a young child to meet an old man. In this case, it's a young English boy that meets an ancient Japanese warrior left behind on an island in the Second World War. And it's about these two civilizations and two cultures meeting, conflicting, and then resolving on an island in I can't remember which sea it is now, but one of those very far away seas, Coral Sea, that's what it is. And I'm sure this book, way back, along with Treasure Island and the other books that I read, was there in my mind. So I ought to thank him for that. I ought to thank him for an awful lot, Saint-Exupéry, really. I tell you the other thing I love. Can I just say it?
Yeah,
I love brevity in a book.
Brevity.
Yeah. It's really good. And it's not just a good book. You might think it's easier for a writer. It most certainly is not. What's wonderful about this is that the thinking that's gone into it and the writing that's gone into it is phenomenal, and it's trimmed down, and it's perfect. I'm not saying the translation is, but in French it's perfect. And I think that's one of the reasons that children love it, is because they can access it, and that's quite important for an awful lot of children.
I think there's something else that children like about it, Michael. I think children like secrets.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, my two certainly do.
Yeah, and this book is a book of secrets. It's a book that whispers, constantly whispering intriguing secrets at you. It's a book of mysteries. I think we forget that too.
Yeah, no, it's very true.
In Michael's foreword, he says the economy of Saint-Exupéry's elegant yet complex prose, and then asks the question, or is it poetry? Ben, is it prose or is it poetry?
I think we tend to have too rigid a distinction between the two things. If you're talking of meter, line breaks, stress,
technicalities, yeah.
That's yeah. Then we're talking typical, a kind of technical way of looking at poetry. But if we speak of poetry as that which speaks 3, 4, 5 languages of the spirit at the same time, if a piece of writing speaks on 3, 4 different levels at the same time, even if it's a telephone directory, which telephone directories don't, that is poetry. So for me, poetry is the ability for words to speak at so many different levels of us simultaneously. I'll give you a very simple example. The use of baobab in the book. Now, the baobab is a sacred African tree. It's we call it the tree of life. It's a great tree. It's a village tree. You shelter under it. It's a very powerful tree. Now, for him to use the baobab as the image of the thing that could tear apart his planet, that's very powerful, because it's combining in that single image the sacredness, the beauty of this tree, but also the power of what it can do. So it's the power of something sacred if it's used in the wrong way. That's what poetry is. Poetry is this ability to turn the human spirit around 360 degrees with a single image.
And Antoine de Saint-Exupéry succeeds, Ben, in that respect. One thing also, and I keep going back to this, Michael, is the understanding of the French and France by reading this. And Ben, as someone who grew up in Nigeria, I wonder if there is a similar piece of work in the different languages, of course, in Nigeria, and the different communities of Nigeria. But if we were to read a translation of that, we would have a similar understanding of the Nigerian peoples, in the same way Michael describes how we will understand France and the French by reading The Little Prince.
Yes, I think every tradition, I think every nation has one or two books that kind of express their spirit perfectly in a tale. We've got things, a book like Things Fall Apart in Nigeria. America might have something like the Great Gatsby. But, I really have to add to what Michael says about understanding the French spirit through reading Little Prince. Absolutely. But I don't know. It helped me understand my spirit. It helped me understand what it meant to be. It helped me to understand my childhood. It's an extraordinary thing, of course, to understand the French, yes. But I think with all true great books, I think it goes beyond that. And I think it's in that sense that it magnifies what it is to be French.
And Baobab's been mentioned, of course. Alice Mazzilli there has done this incredible piece of calligraphy. Children! Exclamation mark. Look out. Baobabs. Look out for them. Alice, oh, that's so good. Just watching that, as I was hearing the conversation and the chapter reading, watching you create that, it's really inspiring, Alice. Superb. Brilliant. Michael, there's so much depth to this. There's so many layers. It's so exciting to hear you read it. It brings you alive every time. There's a question that's come in about whether stories should be read or told, the oral versus the written.
Well, again, it's not an either or, is it?
No, it shouldn't be a binary.
I was talking earlier to Ben about this before we came to speak on air, and he was talking about really having been in a situation in Nigeria where stories were told as people sat around, and you had to make up the stories, and that was part of your contribution to an evening, a convivial evening, a family evening. And yes, I mean, that kind of spontaneous storytelling is wonderful, and the best writing holds that within it, and the best literature holds that within it as well, I think. And I tell you what I sort of learned when I was telling stories before I ever written a story. I used to tell stories to the year 6 class I was teaching, and I did learn one thing which I learned from my mother, and that is that as you're telling a story, your own story, or any story, but your own story in particular, you have to mean it. You mean every word. You look into the eyes of the people in front of you, and you tell them truth. I know it might be fiction, but you tell them truth, and you believe every single word of it. And that's truly the heart of storytelling. It's not pretending. And this book is that, absolutely. This is Exupéry talking to us, down the ages now. And that's what I find so powerful about it.
Do either of you draw like Saint-Exupéry is a question that one of our viewers have sent in. There seems to be a connection between writing and drawing. Ben, how are your artistic...
Well, one of the first things I wanted to be when I was a kid was an artist, and I did draw and paint in my teens before I kind of shifted towards literature, and I still remember when I began writing The Famished Road, to help me actually get actually see that world, and it actually was drawing on the first pages over the writing that I was doing, and it's still there. I think drawing and writing are two very different parts of the brain, of the spirit, and that Saint-Exupéry actually had both of them together is extremely fortuitous, because it's hard to imagine someone else capturing his little prints or even his hat. I mean, just his hat at the beginning of the story is a masterpiece of invisible drawing. So I think without that skill, because he drew as well. He loved art. But I think without that, we'd have had quite a different dimension to the book.
Michael,
it's a masterclass really in how not to teach art. That business of his being put off teaching by what adults. I mean, I was put off two things when I was growing up. I was put off a drawing by an art teacher who said it was no good. So
me too.
Yeah. But I mean, I could have been Van Gogh, no trouble. But I think what's really, really annoying is that it stifles it at a certain moment. And I used to play the violin. I had a violin put in my hand when I was 8. And I had a teacher who made me so nervous and was so cross with me when I got things wrong. I just gave it up. I've always wanted, all my life really, to be able to sing properly and play music properly. And I also had this longing because my mum was an actor and my daddy was an actor. And I always wanted to be an actor when I was growing up. And I didn't have the courage to do it. But that's my own fault, because I was encouraged then at school to do it. But I didn't have the courage, because you need courage to do these things. And so, I mean, I came across writing by accident. It wasn't, actually, yes, probably because I couldn't sing, I couldn't dance, I couldn't paint. So what else do you?
This question has come in saying the Iliad and the Odyssey were told orally and slightly differently by each narrator. This built up the legend and the story of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Shouldn't we return to such a tradition instead of owning a story and create a unique or new story?
Do you want to take this, Michael, or shall I just go first and then?
Ben, you go first, because I'm struggling.
Okay. Well, I think I've always felt that there are two great traditions. There are two great storytelling traditions in the human story, in the human history. One is the telling. And the other is the writing. The telling we had for a long time, for hundreds and hundreds of years. We told stories. We invented. We improvised. And then we got to a state in our civilization where it became necessary to write stories. And the writing of stories and the development of civilization kind of went hand in hand in a way. So I think we have these two traditions. I totally agree that we have tilted excessively towards the writing. And I think it has done a bit of damage to us. I think what it has done is it has made us into a people who believe more in the fixity of things. It has made us into a people who believe that things are real only when they're put down, they're written down, when they're fixed in some form. And I think we've lost the spontaneity of what it is to be human. We've lost the freedom of the imagination that you have when you tell stories. We've also lost the power of what the voice does. We've lost the sound of the voice in storytelling. So I totally agree. I think we should reconcile these two traditions. And what is more, we should practice both of them. I think we teach our children to read through books that are there, and we read books out to them. I think that's wonderful, but I think we should also tell them stories, make stories up to them, in front of them. I think they should participate in the risk of story making and the risk of storytelling. I think that's a very important aspect of empathy and imagination and character building that I think we're missing out on. So I'd like to bring back the risk of telling stories, making them up right there, and possibly even failing while doing it.
That's very important to learn that failing is all right. And children finding their own voice is so important. One thing I would add, I think the question came in and it used the word own. You don't own stories. I think once a story is written and someone else reads it, that story becomes theirs. Because as we know, it's kind of important because the reader is part of the making of the story. The book is simply sitting on a shelf until a reader takes it down and it becomes part of that person's existence as well. And the transmission of that story is really what story making from a book is. In a way, it is a telling. And once you've read it, it's your story. I mean, I own Oliver Twist, you know. It's in my head. I own this story. It's in my, I'm not talking about royalties now. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea here at all. I'm talking actually simply about the idea that the story, once you've read it, is yours, and that's it. It's your possession. It's your life, and that's what is so wonderful. But I think Ben's quite right. The live, and also doing what we're doing now, which is, in a way, telling a story out loud. I know we're reading it, but it's the same technique in a sense, and we've tried to give ourselves to the text as if we were telling it. That's for sure.
Are those traditions, Ben, still alive across Africa? Or are they, like Indian classical music, in some ways in retreat?
In some parts of Africa, they're still alive. In some parts of West Africa, certainly you go to the villages and people, the elders tell stories to the kids. Some of our best stories are really best told, with a kind of wizened face, at night. Nothing quite beats being told stories when it's a bit dark and the moon is out. So yeah, it is in retreat, because writing and reading from books is sweeping across the world, and where books go, the living telling of stories tends to fade. But yeah, I think there's a current. I'm so fascinated by what happens when you tell stories, that I've tried to borrow some of the tropes of living storytelling into my writing. It's not easy, and I'm not sure it's entirely possible. I love the fluidity of told stories. No two people who tell you a tortoise story ever tell you the same story. There's always this personal inflection that takes over, personal inspiration of the moment that takes over.
I think in one mustn't think that in some way a story from a book is any the lesser for it, though, because the one hope for the world for me is that everyone reads books. I think when you're a little person and you're finding out about the world, how else does someone living in Devon, where I come from, find out about Nigeria? Do we just look at the telly? No, we try and read a story that comes from there and get some sense of the people who live there. And that's what books are. At their best, books teach us empathy. And that's just hugely, hugely important. William Caxton did a pretty good thing. Penguin Books did a pretty good thing. This idea that books are for everyone, and libraries. Libraries are the national health of our culture and of our intellect. And it helps us grow, and find out about ourselves. So whilst I do, absolutely, because my classroom experience bears out exactly what Ben says. You're up there, you're telling a story. It's as powerful as you like. But I want the stories told all over the world, so that I find out what's going on in Russia. I will find out what's going on in China. I want them to find out what's going on in Devon. We need to know these things. It is a small world. My goodness, do we know it now?
Yeah, no, but when I was speaking, I'm not speaking out against books in any way. I'm a writer, but I just feel that we, as Ezra Pound said somewhere, that poetry. I'm not going to quote him correctly, but he said poetry diminishes whenever it moves too far away from music. And I think the same thing happens in the relationship between books and the told story. I think if we move too far away from the telling of stories, something happens to our writing. So I think both renew one another. And I think in a culture like this, where we have books, but we don't have enough telling of stories, I think it's good to tilt a little bit, just to have the telling. I like telling my daughter stories. I think she looks at me with different eyes when I'm making up a story. It's as if, whoa, where are you going to take this?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Can you, if you can, decipher how difficult it is to do what Antoine de Saint-Exupéry did in layering a book that captures the imagination of a child and the imagination of an adult. How difficult is that to do, Michael?
It's immensely difficult to get it. So, I mean, I think, funnily enough, I think it's the books that are read very often to very small children that are the best example of this, really. If you read Judith Kerr's The Tiger Who Came to Tea, and you listen to it as a child, or you're reading as a child, it's a tiger who came to tea. And it's a lovely story, and they like the pictures. But adults read it again and again and again because there's something in it for them. It means something probably different to an adult, to a mother, to a father, to a granddad, grandma reading than it does to the child. She didn't sit down and try to, she just wrote a children's story and painted it as such. And I think what's lovely about this is there's nothing about this that you feel that he's worked at trying to make it acceptable across the generations. It simply is. It happens to have an adult in it, and it happens to have a child in it, which is a pretty good way of starting. But it's a situation he puts them in, and what they say to each other, and the way their worlds are so different that they grow together. And above all, it's this wonderful creation of a relationship, two strangers. It's as if they're sitting on a train, really, and just got talking. And that does, you can read that when you're 6 or 7, and you could read it when you're 70 or 80. It has as much, it speaks to all of us. How he did it, I've no idea. If I did, I should be a much better writer.
My one answer to that is how difficult is it? How difficult is it to do? It's almost impossible. The Little Prince is as close to a miracle as you'll get in the story.
What a beautiful way to end our installment today. Ben Okri, it's been such a pleasure to hang out with you and Michael today. And Michael, thank you again. We shall be returning tomorrow with Ruth Wilson, which is very exciting as well. And thank you to Alice Mazzilli as well.
Yes.
Real pleasure.
Thank you, Ben, very much indeed. Bless your heart.
Thank you, Michael. Wonderful.
That's it from us today. So make sure you get involved in Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Ask questions. I shall put as many of them as I possibly can. It's impossible to put all of them. I just have to add that caveat, disclaimer. Can't ask you all of them because so many come in, but we'll do our very best tomorrow. And we're going right through the week celebrating Little Prince, the Petit Prince. Thank you.
Thank you all.